Caliph. To go further in depth, we are pleased to be joined by Middle Eastern expert Walid Phares. Walid, the author of the book, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and Catastrophes to Avoid. Walid, as always, it's good to have you here on America's Forum.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today.
You bet. And speaking of catastrophes, is this one for ISIS and al-Baghdadi?
It would be the case if it was a first lady in America or first lady in France. It doesn't work like this for al-Baghdadi and the jihadists. Number one, she's his second wife. He may have up to 4 wives and maybe concubines. Number two, the possibility that she is actually was seeking medical attention is the highest. I've made phone calls into Lebanon. She was captured, arrested at the Lebanese-Syrian border. We don't have real information about the motives yet, but to answer your question, Congressman, it will be a very important setback psychologically to many members of the ISIS in terms of knowing they cannot cross many borders anymore. That is true. But for that she would have a lot of information. See, the difference with bin Laden is that bin Laden was in hiding. This guy, Baghdadi, is not in hiding. So most likely she will be interrogated. She's an Iraqi citizen, and the Lebanese army, I guess, will interrogate her and get as much information and share this information with the U.S.
Walid, as we understand it, they were caught with the help of foreign intelligence. Which nations do you believe provided that intelligence?
Most likely it's going to be Iraq and Iran in this case, because remember, there is an alliance between the Iranian regime, between the government in Baghdad, the Assad regime, and the Lebanese intelligence service. These 4 organizations are pretty good at collecting information for their own national interest, of course.
Walid, in the 5 minutes we have left, there are some other topics of concern. For example, a photo has been released, an Iranian fighter jet attacking an ISIS position within Iraq. These Iranian bombings in Iraqi airspace are unlikely to have taken place without coordination from somebody, perhaps even the U.S. What do you read into this?
That's a fascinating topic, because in the beginning of the operation against ISIS, we were told here by our government and by European governments that Iran Air Force should not intervene in Iraq, period. Anywhere in Iraq, Iranian intervention could take place if ISIS goes into Iran. But Iranian Air Force, that would be very serious. Why? Because this would intimidate and create a frustration among our Arab allies. Remember, we have the Saudis, we have the UAE, we have Bahrain, we have Jordan, and we will have probably the Egyptians in the future to allow Iranians to move in the airspace. It would be dangerous. Second, if the Iranians would have done it on their own, it means that we don't have a control over, the coordination with the Iraqi government, because it will take the Iraqis to accept Iranian air fighters or bombers in this case to intervene. So this is a red flag. I would consider it very serious.
All right. Well, let's drill down a little bit more on this. So the Iranians using their planes above Iraq implies some sort of Iraqi permission or Iranian, how can we say it, initiative. I don't mean that in a good way. The fallout long-term from this, Walid?
Well, number one, our Arab Sunni allies, the moderates, the ones who are helping us, are financing the operation against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, they are on the opposite side. This would mean to them that they may find themselves in a remote position from us. We may lose them, in other words. So that's one. Number two, the Sunni moderates in Iraq, we are seeking their alliance against ISIS. If they see their areas bombed by the Iranians, they will not make a distinction between ISIS and Sunnis. So that would be negative. I think Washington should tell the Iraqis to tell the Iranians not to use Air Force over Iraq. But I have a little concern, Congressman, I want to share on air right now. It may be that we have known about these things. It may be that because of the general agreement between us and the Iranians on the nuclear process, this is something that some parts of our government may have known.
So, given, and we don't know and probably not necessarily the Secretary of State involved in those Iranian nuclear negotiations, but you believe at some level there was at least some discussion of this.
Yes, because if these things have been going on in a repetitive manner, I mean, of course, the White House would have to intervene and ask the DOD and ask the advisor on the ground to intervene. Nothing was done. So it's a tacit, to me, it means that it's a tacit acknowledgement that, yes, the Iranians are doing this in a limited way. But even if it's limited, it's dangerous. They can expand it, and then under this, they could expand a lot of other programs in the Middle East. That should not have been the case in Iraq.
A couple of minutes remain, Walid. Let me get back to something else that's happened in Iraq. The Iraqi Prime Minister letting go of 24 government officials from the Interior Ministry. What do you make of that, quote, personnel change?
This is part of the package. The Maliki government has been, severely criticized by everybody, including the opposition, that they have been organizing these militias which were pro-Iranian and making a lot of arrests against the Sunni. This is signaling to the West, to the international community, that we are changing, that the Iraqi government is changing, that we are reforming. Remember, you and I discussed the necessity for the Iraqi government to reform so the moderate Sunni would join them. So probably this is a part of the package.
Well, it's good to know that we'll end on what we'll interpret as a hopeful note. Walid Phares, we thank you very much. The name of the book again, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and Catastrophes to Avoid. And America's Forum will continue after this Newsmax Now update.